Apologize to everybody waiting at home. We are running just a few minutes behind with our previous workshop, but we're going to go ahead and launch right into this one. And with that, Dallas, please get us started.
Good evening, Mr. Mayor, City Commissioners. This is the second budget workshop. We're going to be focusing on your governmental funds, primarily your general fund, as well as a couple of your smaller funds. City manager sends his apologies that he was not able to attend, but I'm sure he is loving that I am doing this on my own. So, as always, we'll start with the budget timeline. The next biggest thing that's coming before the commission in terms of budget is at your next commission meeting next Monday. The commission will be voting to set the preliminary millage rate. As the commission knows, this is the cap or the highest you can set your millage rate without having to renotice all of our tax-paying residents. This is the rate that will go on your trim notice that will be mailed out in August. Right, just as a reminder of what we are going to be looking at today, we're doing our governmental funds, which are going to include your general fund, your special revenue funds, capital project funds, and debt service funds. This year we are anticipating retiring the capital project fund, which is currently funding the fire station expansion, and we eliminated the debt service fund after the commission paid off the fire station debt. We also eliminated one of our special revenue funds, which was the Diamond Sports Park Fund, was eliminated in the current year. So we actually only have 3 governmental funds left, which are your general fund, a special revenue fund for wild spaces, public places, and a special revenue fund for your Champions Park expenditures. Budgeting guidelines and policies. These are the policies and guidelines we use when creating your budget. We strive to maintain at least 2.5 months of emergency operating reserves in your major funds, which would be your general fund, your electric, your water, wastewater funds. Currently, we need about $1.4 million in the general fund in your emergency reserves, and we hold approximately $1.2 million. As you know, at the end of last fiscal year, we had hit that number, and then we used a little bit of them this year to pay off the fire station loan. The fiscal year 19 budget does include funding to repay back the general fund for that loan expenditure and to rebuild the reserves back to where we think they should be. We always use one-time revenues to fund one-time expenditures or place them into reserves. We don't operate off of one-time revenues. A great example of this is the fire station was built using a one-time revenue from the sale of a tower. State law requires we have a balanced budget, so we always present a balanced budget. Our enterprise funds and your utility services, we strive to have equitable and fair rates, and for our rates to be sufficient to meet the operating expenditures of the utilities. We're going to talk a little bit about that later on. We have one utility in the general fund, your solid waste utility, that currently isn't meeting, revenues aren't meeting expenditures, and we propose a slight rate increase to help shore that up. We also strive to develop a diversified and stable revenue system. The past couple of years, the commission has very heavily worked on this item with the increases in your fire assessment as well as your mosquito control fee, your franchise fees, etc. And then of course we take into account inflationary factors and then changes in population when preparing the budget. If we had a large increase in population or inflation increase, we'd see a increase in the budget, and if we had a decrease in population, we'd see a decrease in the budget. Some of the accomplishments that we've had in the last couple years, as you guys all know, we, like I said earlier, got to our reserve number last year. We were very excited about that. However, then we promptly spent some of it. However, I still maintain that it was in the best interest of the city and will save us money in the long run. And I do want to remind the commission that when we talk about those reserves, those are our emergency operating reserves. Those are reserves we keep on hand for a state, for our financial rainy day, for a state of emergency, a hurricane or something else. In terms of true unassigned reserves, we don't currently have any. So we don't have any reserves that are put away to build a new city hall, to do any sort of projects like that. That is something we're going to be looking at going forward once we hit that emergency reserve number again. As I mentioned earlier, we've diversified our revenues in the last couple of years, including the franchise fee and electric and natural gas, the successful renegotiation of the local option fuel tax with the county, as well as the mosquito control fee. We've increased our funding for public safety in the last few years. We've increased our funding for the repair and replacement of our major assets. We established the VERF, which is my new favorite thing. It's the Vehicle and Equipment Replacement Fund. The fiscal year 19 budget is the first year that the VERF is fully functioning. The first of the VERF The VERF, because of its existence, is this year able to fully buy 3 different vehicles without being a large impact to the general fund budget, because we're levelizing those costs over the life expectancy of the vehicles. And once we continue to buy more and more vehicles and replace our fleet, the VERF will become fully self-sufficient, and we won't have to think about replacing the vehicles every year. It won't be a major item.
I think we should rename it REV,
The REF,
since it's car-related.
the
Replacement of vehicle and equipment.
We can do that.
I like VERF.
We'll do VERF/REV. And then, as the commission knows, we've been funding expansion of our infrastructure in the last few years, most notably your State Road 26 water main, the fire station renovations and upgrades, the SCADA system, and then a road resurfacing program. We've developed equitable water and wastewater rates, competitive electric rates with a decreasing trend in rates for the last few years. We lowered our solid waste rates, maybe a little too much. We've continued funding of our economic development incentives. And then the crowning achievement, I think, for the last few years is we saved our residents $750,000 by contracting with the sheriff directly for law enforcement services. Absolutely kudos to the commission on all of that. The items that are up for consideration tonight as I go through this presentation are going to be pretty much the same we always ask the commission about. We have some revenue diversification options if the commission would like to look at different ways to increase revenue, diversify the revenue. The millage rate, like I said, at the next commission meeting, the commission will be voting on the preliminary millage rate. With the millage rate, we're going to be talking about the homestead exemption amendment, which we all anticipate will pass and will be about $150,000 annual impact to the city's budget. We'll be talking about personnel and operating expenses, the capital improvement program, and then the utility rate adjustment for solid waste. The budget before you tonight assumes no change in the millage rate. It is based off of the same millage rate as last year at 5.9999. It assumes no increase in the fire assessment rate. It does assume a 50-cent a month increase in the solid waste charges to all customers.
Would that potentially just be a pass-through?
There's a
from
large
Waste Pro, or?
portion of it that is a pass-through, but there are costs the city incurs in providing that service.
We're providing the billing.
We do the billing, and then our
handling
Public
service,
Works
right?
Department has some time that they spend in the solid waste arena. We assume no new revenue streams. We continue to provide for the $50,000 worth of contingency funding. We have an up to 4% merit for staff, which has been the commission's policy the last few years. Citywide, there's one and a half new full-time equivalent employees. In the general fund, it's about 3/4 of a full-time equivalent employee. My screen went dead, so I'm going to look over here. We are continuing to fund capital improvements and enhancements, and the net impact to customers, all things considered, is about $2 a month increase. So here's a real big picture. Look at your general fund. We have about $6.7 million in revenue and about $6.7 million in expenses. We have a little bit of revenue over expenses. There is a copy of the budget included in your backup documentation. It looks like, I don't have a copy. You guys know what it looks like. It looks like this, but less. Yeah. There you go. Yeah, draft 15. Moving into your special revenue funds, your other smaller governmental funds. Champions Park, I have question marks because until the RFP is decided by the commission, we don't know what the budget's going to look like. It'll mostly be whatever money comes in from the operator and then whatever capital outlay we decide to work on next year.
I think that's an important point for the commission just to sleep on, because we'll be looking at these presentations on the 31st, but right now there is no money budgeted from our end. So any money that goes into the park is going to have to come in from the operator generating their own revenues. We're not planning on funding that park. So if any of the presentations, I don't know if you had a chance to look through the bid packages, none of them are asking for money, but, you know, sometimes those things change as negotiations go on. And, well, we really need you to do X, Y, and Z. We're just, so if you foresee that, then that's something that you might want to bring up and say, we don't know what, there's a big question mark here, and that might be a question mark that has a lot of dollars behind it. Just as something to mill over, nothing that you need to think about necessarily right now.
In your discretionary sales surtax fund, also known as wild spaces, we did see a hefty increase in wild spaces funding this year. About $35,000 additional is anticipated for fiscal year 19. And so we have budgeted the capital expenses based on the capital plan the commission voted on, I believe, back in February or March. And so those are based upon what we think we can get done in the projects that are coming down the line. Your revenue diversification options, the biggest, easiest, kind of low-hanging fruit available to the commission is a utility tax on water sales. Currently, we do not tax the water sales within the city. Most municipalities do. State statute provides that the commission can levy a tax of up to 10% on the sale of water within the city. Each percentage that the commission would levy would generate approximately $6,300, so you have a max of $63,000 that you could capture through that utility tax. We would also have, I think, a fairly successful rate of capturing that since we bill the water utility. So we would know that we're paying ourselves all the taxes we need to. And then the next section is your special assessments. As the commission knows, we have a fire assessment for fire protection. Well, there are a variety of different avenues and things that a special assessment could fund. We've listed a couple of them there for you, but the list is really kind of unending as long as it provides a benefit to property. Moving on to your solid waste. As I mentioned earlier, the solid waste utility is not currently self-sustaining. We've had a full year underneath our belt with the new rates in the new contract with Waste Pro, and we've determined that our new rates aren't sufficient to meet our expenditures. We're currently projecting about a $25,000 loss at the end of the year. To make up for that loss, we would need a full dollar from each customer, so we'd need to raise our rates to $15.75 per customer, and then $1 on each of our commercial accounts as well. So we propose a 2-year step-in to that increase, a 50% increase this year, and then a 50% increase in fiscal year 2020.
Mr. Glanzer.
Doesn't that still put us below what we were before they decreased us last year? So it's not like they're having to pay more than we used to.
Yes, ma'am. We would still be below what our old rates were, and we would be below most of our peers.
Commissioner Martin.
From a standpoint of value, when I speak to taxes, I think we have set a pretty decent tone historically about getting these sections solvent on their own. If it's $1, I would effort and ask my fellow commissioners to just support ripping the Band-Aid off and doing the $1 and just being done with it.
Does anyone, other commissioner, want to weigh in on that, give staff direction?
I would agree with that because it's still below historically what they've been paying. I mean, that's how I feel about it.
Anyone else?
I'm good with that.
All right. Go ahead and integrate that into the next presentation.
Absolutely. That'll add another $12,000 to the budget. So when you're looking at those numbers where it says we have a $12,000 surplus, you can, in your mind, make it $24,000 with that increased 50 cents. All right. Moving into your millage. The city has a very good year this year. Our 2018 gross taxable value is about $430 million. That's up almost 10% from last year. However, the Save Our Homes cap is at 2.1%. So our residents, those who've lived here and have a homestead, will only see a 2.1% increase in their taxable value. The rollback rate is 5.7014. Again, staff is proposing to keep the current millage rate at 5.9999 for this year's budget.
Commissioner Farnsworth.
Do you know what percentage fall into that 2.5%?
I don't, any home that is homesteaded would have the Save Our Homes cap. I don't know what
Bless you.
percentage of our residents are homesteaded. The millage rate comparison, as you can see, we are solidly in the middle. There's a pretty tight gap between, or pretty tight range between the unincorporated county, High Springs, and us. And then the city of Alachua is 1.1 mils above us. That always feels good. There's a graph of that same information. As we spoke about at the last commission meeting, or last budget workshop, we do anticipate that the Amendment 1 additional homestead exemption will pass, which will take effect in fiscal year 2020. We are trying to prepare for that decrease. If our taxable value increases at the same rate it did this year, and this passes, we'll be almost revenue neutral next year, so we'll provide no increases for additional revenue to offset those increases in expenses we face every year, such as your retirement and utility rates and insurance rates and all those things that are outside of our control. We typically take those increases and we run those into those expenses, so they kind of, budget stays net neutral. But next year we are anticipating that we probably won't have that base increase because of Amendment 1. So we are looking at about $25 million loss in valuation next year. So our impact on residents will be slightly different since we've changed our solid waste charge. So instead, we were projecting a $26 an annual increase to most of our residents. With the additional $6, it'll be $32 annually. The county commission has adopted a lower millage rate than they adopted this year, which saves our residents a whopping $1.63. So with all that combined, the net impact to our residents would be about $30 a year, or $2 and change per month. All right, moving into personnel, we've had some increases that are outside of our control, as always. Florida retirement system, health insurance. I believe at the last workshop, the commission asked for information about us joining perhaps the state's health insurance. We did look into that, and we did not get very far. People we talked to did not seem very interested in allowing us to jump into a pool with the state health insurance.
That's before you get too far away. Back on your millage rate comparison, and unincorporated, I don't see anything in there for stormwater tax or any of those kinds of things. Did we, when we're comparing ourselves to unincorporated area, have we integrated those new taxes and fees that the county is looking at, the increase in fire assessment, those kind of things?
We do have the fire assessment. We did the best we could to convert that into a millage. We do not have the stormwater assessment fee. It's a little more complicated to convert into a millage, but we can certainly work on that for
I'm just
next year.
curious if that would, where that would put us, because I know for some folks it's now cheaper to be in the city of Newberry than it is to be in an unincorporated area. So I want to make sure we're as up to date with that data as we can be. I don't mean to
Yes, sir.
derail you. Go right back.
Personnel, as I mentioned earlier, we've budgeted up to 4% merit increase for staff. We do have new positions funded in the budget. There's a part-time administrative support position in the Finance and Administration Department. There is a full-time project manager in our Utilities and Public Works Department. And then we do have an additional position funded in our fire department due to an employee who's going on military leave. And so we have to fill his spot while he's on leave, but we effectively have to double pay because we have to pay that employee while they're on military leave, and then we have to pay an employee to fill that spot. So there is an increase in cost in the fire department while that occurs.
They're on leave from us to them.
Correct. The military does pay them. State law requires that we allow them to use any leave they have on the books while they're gone. So, and we have to pay them for 30 days after they leave as well. This year, unlike most years, we have several increases in our operating accounts, both recurring and non-recurring. You have a sheet in front of you. It looks like this. This gives you a little bit of detail on some of the recurring and non-recurring expenditures, some of the capital improvements. It's the things that are the bigger ones that are non-programmatic, that the commission could direct to either be removed or enhanced. But these are all currently funded in the budget that is presented to you. So some of the recurring costs that are ongoing for the next several years at least we are anticipating an increased cost in our audit. The audit's going out for bid typically after we've had our audit cost locked in for the last 5 years. I'd anticipate that they'll go up this year. There's the law enforcement contract, which has an automatic increase. There are costs related to the Diamond Sports Park that have been absorbed by the general fund since Diamond Sports Park was closed. There is a request to outsource the plan reviews done by the building department. And then there have been some utility adjustments. We've found some inaccuracies in our the way we were charging departments for billing that have moved some cost into the general fund. We have some one-time costs, and again, these are all in that sheet for more detail if you'd like. Staff is proposing a land development regulation update. We're proposing that we move the server from its current location, which is in the back of someone's office, to a more secure location. There's a facilities master plan to determine what the city needs to do long-term with the facilities in the downtown area as well as some of the facilities in the outlying areas. And then there's the charter review costs, which relate to legal expenses and the cost of having an additional election if the commission so chooses. All right, moving into capital investments.
Any questions before we move into capital? Everybody good on the revenues and operations? Okay, move right along.
As the commission knows, our capital improvement program is a 5-year program that we update every year, looking out 5 years to the different expenditures and expenses that are coming down the road and making sure we have proper funding for them. It includes such things as road paving and resurfacing, facilities, vehicles, IT infrastructure, parks, and then additional enhancements and improvements. You have a copy of if this isn't the full CIP, this is only CIP that's funded this year. The rest of it's still under construction. But this is everything that's funded this year out of your capital. And again, there's more detail for the larger items on this sheet. So this is the list, as you may recall from last year. We put everything on a single page. We go through and we decide what needs to be funded and what doesn't need to be funded. So this is everything that is kind of above and beyond outside of the norm or is programmatic that may be removed or changed if we needed it to be. So you should also have a copy of that on the dais. It looks like this. And then I just have copies of it in the PowerPoint here. So we were able to fund most of all of our A's and most of our B's this year. We do have a few of the priority B items that were not funded. As you can see, if the commission would like to fund them, obviously you could remove something else, but there is also the millage rate associated with funding those items associated with it on the right-hand side of the column. Okay. So we are in the home stretch here, but back to commission considerations. The first one would be revenue diversification. I'd like to get any input on whether the commission would be interested in pursuing any revenue diversification options.
So anybody interested in the water utility tax? I know I live in Central Florida electric district, so I pay the electric tax, but I don't pay anything on the water tax, and I wouldn't pay it in this situation because I'm still on a well. But Commissioner Glanzer.
What do the other municipalities do? I mean, of the other 8 small municipalities, do they charge water tax? Do you know?
Do you know that, Alice, or does Jamie know?
I wouldn't want to be the only municipality that charges
I
water.
think the industry standard is to charge a tax, but I'm not sure right around us
I know
what that is.
Alachua in the city of Gainesville charge it. I am unsure about the other municipalities, but I can check.
I mean, I would argue that when you look at that bar graph that shows us against the other cities, a lot of those other cities come in lower than us because they are getting other systems of revenue. And so the things that we punch into that, they come in lower because they're getting these other things. So will we have that information by the next budget workshop? And find out, is there any, I think generally speaking, when we do those things, you kind of ease into them, so you don't have to go the full 10. You could do 2%, 4%.
10% seems like ridiculous,
Yeah.
but maybe half or less in the first year, I would be.
Okay. We recently had the issue in Newberry Oaks about speed tables, and one of the options for that neighborhood was to do a special district taxing unit where that neighborhood, to date, we haven't had any neighborhood come up with that, but it seemed to me that there was some appetite on the commission to do something. Now we still have the third study waiting to come back completely on that. I would say, this is the time to have that conversation when we're in the budget. When we had that conversation before, it was under presentations. We were just getting information in, but now is the budget time. So if we believe that moving forward, we want to allocate, I think we finally did pinpoint it's about $5,000 for two, so about $2,500 a piece. We still haven't got an exact budget, but am I in the right ballpark, Jamie? So about $2,500 a piece. I know I've been contacted by residents in Country Way that have said we want them too. I've been contacted by residents up and down 15th Street that say, hey, if that's we want them. I think a resident that night spoke about 15th in front of the elementary school. So if speed tables are back on the table, I think now would be the time to say, hey, we got $13,000 surplus. I think $13,000 should be in speed tables, but then we're going to have the issue of who gets them first. So I think would be best to be thrown back into our stated policy of what does the speed studies show that they're needed. That way, when residents from another neighborhood come, they say, well, why did that neighborhood get them? We can say, well, we did the speed studies. There's an issue there. That's why they got moved up and they got them first. So, that just now would be the time to plan on it instead of just having to kind of wing it throughout the year and put them up here and there. Is there any interest in setting aside some money for those kinds of things, and it's specific there, or do we think this is the first one that's got this far? And the speed study, the two speed studies said there's no issue. Commissioner Glanzer.
Okay. First, I have a lot of things to say about that. One is that I don't think we should put them in unless you have a speed study, because as we saw with that one neighborhood, we're having a third study done. The first two showed that we don't need it, and we're having a third one done. And if they still want it, what would be the problem with having a special district taxing unit? Because if it's just for that neighborhood, why should the rest of the city pay for their, speed tables? Same thing with Country Way. If they want it, perhaps there would be a special district taxing unit there too. But I really think we need to make sure it's needed. And let me ask you this question. So is it either a special taxing unit or put it in our budget? I mean, how does that work?
I think it could be either. I mean, obviously, if you just want to have a line item for speed tables that, and this is kind of where we were 4 years ago when this all started. We had a flood of requests, and it was becoming a need for a line item. And we said, well, if it's going to be a line item, and every year we're going to be spending $10,000 to $15,000 on speed tables, we need to have a policy set to determine if the speed table is needed, and then who gets it first, because we were inundated with requests for speed tables. Since that conversation, I've had people that want them on chip sealed roads all over. I mean, there's no end to the requests. So, this is the first resident we've had actually work through our policy, and I think, we spent about $4,000 on an engineer to come and study our policy to make sure our policy was performing accurately, and he reported, we've done two speed studies, there is no problem, you guys could do it if you want to, but the speed studies don't warrant it, and speed studies are a valid approach to this issue. So, but there seemed to be some desire to sort of pitch the policy out and do something. So maybe everybody slept on that and they're not there anymore. If there is a desire to sort of, say, well, we've got the policy, but I think there's still an issue, then I would suggest now's the time to start scheduling or budgeting for it. Or if you say, well, no, I've slept on it, I'm willing to stick with the policy, and the policy said no, then maybe we don't need to budget for it. $2,500, we could probably, in the middle of the year, figure something out. If a speed study said, man, we really do have an issue here and it's dangerous, we could probably address it. But without that policy, I think the floodgates open up, and we need to start planning on $10,000 to $15,000 a year to address these. Commissioner Martin?
The whole issue of the speed tables is incredibly irritating to me. Not from a financial impact so much as a staff organizing issue and just dealing with this. And I think it's compounded by the fact that if people will just take the personal responsibility to conduct themselves with a monochrome of decency, then it's not an issue. This conversation has already got me into thinking, well, special taxing district, you have this street. Is it just the people on this street? What about the people that use this street that live off that street? What about if you did it in Newberry Oaks? What about the Matt Hershams of the world that are at the other end of the neighborhood that never use that street? So all of this is just a ridiculous domino effect, and it just irritates the living daylights out of me that stuff gets to this point. And I'm not proffering an answer here, unfortunately, but more venting about it than anything. I'm probably okay with speculating an item in the budget to allot for something, but working on special districts and that sort of thing, I think is going to get way more cumbersome than a part-time commission is probably going to end up having to deal with. So I look forward to other people's thoughts on the idea to create some clarity with this stupid issue.
Commissioner Coleman?
Yeah, I'm not that. The problem is with these neighborhoods, it's just like Commissioner Martin said, especially this neighborhood. You got so many people in the very back there that's going to use that same road, but if you're only going to tax, where it gets cumbersome is who are you taxing? You taxing the very back there, the new part, the new side, or just the guys that are on that one road? If the third study comes back and says, yeah, we messed up and all that, I believe we can find the money to put in 2 of them. But it's just such a vicious cycle anyway, because now I'm already getting calls about 233rd. I'm getting where people are so, well, they're just going to go down 3rd and avoid the area. So I'm waiting. My comment here is I'm waiting to see what this third, what comes back. And but right now, I'm not for putting any money each year in for speed tables at all. So when we, like I said, this one right here, the 2 studies are warranted. There's not even. So that's where.
Well, I would say we always have the 50,000 contingency. So at $2,500 a pop, we've probably always covered under the contingency. If a speed study does come in and say, man, we really do have a problem here, we could absorb that cost. What about anything else on this list here? Millage rate, homestead exemption amendment, personnel expense, if anything that anybody needs to? Commissioner Farnsworth?
I just had some questions about the funded capital and extraordinary items.
On which list are you looking at? The more detailed list?
These
Okay.
are all funded items?
These are all funded. Go ahead.
First of all, the paving of the parking lot, I guess that's the one right here behind the city hall.
No, sir, it's the parking lot across the street in between my building and the Main Street Gallery.
Okay. What about the one behind the parking, behind the city hall?
I believe that would be anticipated as part of the City Hall expansion that's in the CIP. And I believe part of the reason we're waiting off on that is to see what we can get out of DOT in the twin pairs.
I mean, does that really need to be paved over there? I mean, they're all
he
dangerous.
can't answer that question. I mean,
I think so.
the
It's my
reason
parking
it's
lot.
in is because of the trips and falls and complaints that we've had and the liability. That's why it's there. I think it's been cut for the last 2, maybe 3 years. And so it's always been in the CIP plan, and it's always been recognized as a project that would be great to be funded, but it has never made it through all the way.
It's also, Mr. Mayor, if I remember the manager's comments correctly, it is the only remaining dirt public parking lot in our downtown area. And as we were trying to continue to make our downtown a more enjoyable place to visit, paving that parking lot would allow additional parking.
Well, I think it's also a hypocrisy issue because we would never allow a private business to come in with a dirt parking lot,
Except the one next door.
but we do it. So,
No, it's just been that way forever, so I didn't know.
Yeah.
whether something had changed that it needed to be paved. The Eastern Newberry Sports Complex signs, can they not be paid out of wild places, or wild spaces?
Yes, Mr. Mayor, it could be. However, the wild spaces money has been thoroughly allocated, and it is staff's
and half of that is
recommendation.
paid for through the Easton folks?
Yes, sir. We are anticipating that Easton would split the cost with us, so it would really only be $7,500 to the city. Part of staff's recommendation is that we continue to fund certain projects out of the general fund for recreation, knowing that wild spaces will eventually end. And so those certain maintenance projects and those sorts of projects, we would like to continue funding so we don't, in 7 years, have a funding gap that we then have to address.
I have a feeling that wild places will never end, along with the continuous tasking from the school board. Moving of the server, can that be moved off-site, or does it have to be in the city hall? Can it be moved to a facility off-site?
It can be moved off-site from City Hall, but it needs to be somewhere that is on our fiber ring.
Okay.
So it had to either be here, the yard, my office, utility office, or
So it couldn't go
else.
to a server that, outside the city? There are companies that
When we
provide
replace
server
this
services.
server, we are seriously considering a cloud server.
Right.
So we anticipate this server will be the last server we have on site. But this server has probably 7 or 8 more years of life expectancy.
Mhm.
So our next server will most certainly be a cloud-based server. We would retain some of our server capabilities on site in case there is an outage and to provide some computing power locally. But it is, the server rack and the big servers and everything we currently have are not long for this world in the long term.
Question on the project manager and your staff assistant. What became of the people that were working at Diamond?
The only people that were at Diamond were 2 part-time employees, and they were moved into the Easton pool of part-time employees. So all of the current Easton employees got fewer hours, and those 2 new employees from Diamond picked up those hours.
Who's currently doing the project manager? Is
Jamie.
Jamie doing that? You don't like doing that kind of stuff?
It's not that he doesn't like it, it's that there are too many projects and too few Jamies.
And you need a full-time person for that, huh?
We believe so.
Jamie's doing it part-time, we can't get.
Jamie's currently being full-time utility director and full-time project manager.
Yeah,
We'd like to keep Jamie.
I would argue that one is a necessity. We have so many things going on. When I go to the Alachua County League of Cities meeting, at the end, they say, "What's going on in your city?" And I always run out of time. We have so many projects that are going that people ask me about all the time. You said this was happening. You said this was happening. And I say, they're all still happening. They're just, we got limited staff to move those balls down.
Okay.
Commissioner Martin?
You mentioned something about moving the server on the fiber ring. Does it behoove us to try to get it to Easton, which is still considered a shelter, and is that on the ring?
Easton is not currently connected to the city via fiber.
Okay.
We do have, when we replaced our old server with the current server, we took our old servers and moved them to Easton, and they currently provide backup and replication for us. So if something were to happen to these servers, the city maintains backups at Easton, as well as several other off-site locations. It also provides server services to Easton. Because we don't have gigabit internet connections, having those servers at Easton helps them have a faster connection. If we were to move the city's main servers to Easton, we would have to increase the city's internet connection here and at Easton to provide a fast enough connection for the office staff that works in the city proper to connect to the servers.
Okay. One other item, outsourcing the plan review. We added another person in that department due to volume, and now we're adding this plan review. Follow my logic here. We have, I think, a pathway of going a little too fast for what we can keep up with in the city. I don't know if we're necessarily at that exponential point yet. I don't want to get there. I realize it would be unpopular to slow up the builders, but I know we have issues at the schools. The kids are all on top of each other, and allowing more houses to get built even faster is going to compound that issue. I don't know if I'll tell you, I'm not in favor of adding the plan review to speed up the process, because I think it compounds a problem that we're on a collision course of hitting. And anything we can do to rein that in a little bit, I would encourage my fellow commissioners to try to point us in that direction. Most notably in the basket of the issues that we have at the schools. I mean, obviously the mayor's a teacher. He may or may not want to opine on that, but I'd like the fellow commissioners to maybe consider that.
I can tell you it's crowded and it's going to stay that way for a few more years, because they haven't even got to the picking the location yet. So from picking the location to building the school, we're still 5 to 7 years out from any alleviation. What I would suggest is everybody kind of sleep on Commissioner Martin's comments, talk directly to Mike about this piece, and we've got another budget workshop, plenty of time to consider his concerns, which are 100% valid concerns. I think, what are we growing at right now? Plus 11%. Most of the one of the benefits of being a human geography teacher is you get to read all this kind of boring information, but sustainable growth is generally around 5%, argued to be around 5%. So 11% is pretty fast. I don't know if this is the answer. I think our main problem is that everybody just wants to come join us, and that's a good problem to have. But it's something to consider. Absolutely, yeah. Was that it, Commissioner Martin? Yes. All right, any other questions, comments? Yes.
To piggyback onto his suggestion, the other side of the coin is, as you said, the reason we have the problem is because people want to live here, and families coming here, they shop here, they eat here, they add to our tax base somewhat. So I'm not sure putting up a stop sign is going to help us get more schools. That's going to have to happen over time, and, we don't have to reinvent the wheel. I don't think we're the only community dealing with it. I don't know what the answer is, but I would hate to see us discourage families from coming here. Second thing, I would like to add an item, if possible. We all know the Main Street program has just really had some great successes in the past couple of years, especially. And when they're not a club, they're not a private club. They're actually established by the city of Newberry. And I didn't do the research. I'm sorry. I'll have that for the next budget meeting. But what I remember was that the city was somehow obligated to give some kind of financial support to them. And we haven't done that for many years. And I think now they're deserving of it. And I wondered if, how we could go about getting some money in there. I spoke with a Main Street person today, and they said that they had their board meeting tonight, so they couldn't be here to present a report, but they'd be willing to come back on August 2nd and let us know what they're doing, what they're planning for next year. And I'd like to propose, a line item, maybe $10,000 or less, but something in there to show our gratitude for how it's grown and it's strong, and it's they have more members now doing more of the work. It's really become something that we had envisioned in the beginning. So.
Well, during the budget season is always the appropriate time for any resident or entity to come and make the pitch for what they want the city to budget. So I would encourage you to say absolutely they should come on, and I think that their pathway to success is going to be linked to telling exactly what they want to do with the money and having a number. So if they can integrate that into their presentation, I'm sure that would be the bulk of the questions from the commission is why this amount, what's going to happen with it, those kinds of things. So is that head nod, everybody accept the presentation on the 2nd? I mean, these are public meetings. Anybody can come at any point and give us a presentation and say, I want you to budget for this. I want you to budget for that.
Can I say one more thing? And I wanted to emphasize the fact that because we do have a lot of great clubs in this community, the Lions Club and other clubs, but Main Street is really a function of the city. It's something that we went and got, and we support it, as a city. It's not a private club, so that would be the reason I would support.
Well, there are state regulations. You're right about that. There are state regulations, and we spent a lot of money to go get the designation of being a Main Street community. And the main Tallahassee has been very flexible with us and allowing us not to fund for the past few years. So at some point the question probably has to be, do we want to go ahead and let that Main Street designation go, or do we want to begin working back towards the type of Main Street functions that Main Street were always intended to have?
We get points for grants.
Absolutely. Well, that was one of the main reasons we wanted the Main Street designation, because they could partner with us to go after grants. I haven't heard any comment on the, that's because I don't see it up there. I mean, it's the second page. Expecting a nominal increase in electric rates. No one's.
Mr. Mayor,
I'm
we'll
on the
discuss
wrong.
the electric rates more in depth at the next
Ah.
workshop.
Okay, it's on mine here, but we'll pull it off since it's getting late. Any other commission considerations? Commissioner Martin.
Dallas, I had another question, not totally sure where it may or may not fit in. The Diamond Sports Park, when we ended that contract, the money from the current budget, educate us on where the income and the expenses went again for the remainder of the year.
Well, Mr. Mayor, we effectively on end of June, froze all of the accounts at Diamond to allow no more activity, since there should have been no more activity at Diamond. So the revenue and expense accounts just kind of went away, or they will go away in the next budget year. The programs that Recreation is bringing over to Easton, they brought over the associated revenues and expenditures. So you'll see an increase in Recreation revenues for next year and Recreation expenses. Those are primarily related to the adult programs that we're absorbing from Diamond. The money that was in Diamond when we closed out Diamond, or when we get to close out Diamond, will be transferred to the general fund, and it will either go into reserves or be used for one-time expenses.
Any other questions or comments under commission considerations? Okay. Go ahead, Dallas.
Again, next Monday, the commission will be voting on the preliminary millage rate. On August 2nd, we have the third budget workshop, which will primarily be related to the enterprise funds, your utilities, and Main Street. And then we'll mail out our trim notices. Your final vote on your fire assessment will be on the 27th. That Wednesday, we have our final budget workshop, which is a wrap-up to close any loose ends that may exist in the budget. And then we begin our hearings on September 10th and 27th, and then we adopt the budget starting on October 1st.
Dallas, we have our final decision with the county on the CRA and the roads deal. But if that passes successfully, Newberry will have some financial obligations along with the county to chip seal. Are we planning for that in this year's budget? Are we anticipating that by the time that deal is wrapped up and the county pulls the trigger and is ready to chip seal, we'll be into next? Is that what we're hoping?
Yes. We do continue to fund the road resurfacing and road paving program at $100,000 a year. We could certainly use that money towards those projects. We also are holding some gas tax reserves that we just haven't spent because we've been keeping the projects within that $100,000 a year. We spend a little bit of it every year. So we could do a larger project if we needed to. If we needed to do one of those projects next year, we could use those two funding sources to
Okay.
cover it. And then in fiscal year 2020, we begin to see our first increase in the loft, and hopefully that'll take care of it as well.
Okay. And I think the next slide is questions or comments. So questions, comments? Does the public have any questions or comments? Hearing none, unless people are just articulating in their minds, we are adjourned.